Okay, well, hello everyone. It's been since January 30th, 2020, since our last Storm Wisdom evening session. And as you can see, our venue has changed because we're complying with the quarantine and we're broadcasting from home. And today has been a mix of enormous technical difficulties trying to get everything arranged so that the set is in perfect order so that we can broadcast from home. Well, in our last episode, I know I've been using that term lately, but after I left in January 30th, I had to go to Japan to put on some workshops, private sessions and stuff, and my wife was over there, and as you know, that's when the pandemic hit, and we were just fine during all that period, and we got back just under the wire, and we come back to a completely different reality, completely different world. And so we've been adjusting to that like everybody else has. And I wasn't really going to do another evening session, quantum navigation evening session, until, you know, I got the impetus, and they've been giving me the impetus to share some more information. And so tonight, the theme is really important from what they're communicating with me. And the theme is about when you're inside of a quantum system or quantum environment, what you propagate proliferates and populates the reality. And so this is the theme we're going to work with. And as you can imagine, if you think about it, the entire reality is a quantum system. And so what we think, what we feel, according to Schrodinger's principle, is our entanglement. It's our relationship with entanglements. So the observer really does create an impact in the reality. And so I've got to go over some basics. It's going to seem like mundane, but you're going to see it's going to apply later on deeper into the message that they want me to try to communicate. And so let's get started with this thing and see where this pans out. Meditation. One of the biggest obstacles in meditation, as you probably well know, is the mind. And undisciplined mind turns the host into a slave, basically speaking. But if we train the mind and discipline the mind, then the mind becomes one of the greatest assets, the greatest tool, the greatest allies that we could have. And so in early stages of meditation, bringing the mind to the deep rhythmic belly breathing really helps in bringing the mind out of beta brainwave state. Now, beta brainwave state is a dissonant form of a wave in relationship to the more symmetrical and harmonic brainwave states of like alpha, theta, delta, gamma, and such deeper brainwave states. Now, the important element, the important message, as you're breathing deep and rhythmic, the organ and the bodies assist in this whole process because the organs have a natural 8-second rhythm. So 8-second systole, 8-second extole. So inhale for 8 seconds, exhale for 8 seconds. That's the natural rhythm. It's hard to get to that at the beginning stages. And so 5 seconds is good. 5 seconds inhale, 5 seconds exhale. Now, Of course, the mind wants to do its own thing, and it has to be treated kind of with kids' gloves. With positive reinforcement, we can go a lot further with the mind than if we use command, demand, and force. Those have repercussions that affect you later on down the road. So as you use a positive reinforcement, just invite the mind back to maintaining its focus on the rhythmic breathing. Then the 5 seconds as you relax goes into 8 seconds. 8 seconds, the body begins to help you move out of beta brainwave frequency and drop into alpha. Alpha is a much more relaxed, calm, and meditative state. Now, to really see the difference between beta brainwave and alpha brainwave, we have to use a metaphor, and the metaphor would be beta brainwave. We could draw it incoherent or dissonant, so it have spikes all over it. So as you can see, it doesn't really invite other waveforms to nest with it. So metaphorically speaking, alpha is more symmetrical wave. And once you get to alpha, this is the important thing. Once you get to a symmetrical wave, a coherent wave, it likes to invite the other waveforms that are similar to it to come and join in with that frequency. That's the important element. So as we get the mind to relax out of the beta brainwave, we start cohering with other brainwave frequencies. And then those frequencies help us, as they cohere together, we get greater depth and expansiveness in our ability to sense and feel connected to more states of the reality. So you're not just staying in one state, let's say just alpha, you're adding alpha to the next state, theta and delta and so on. But there's much more waveforms that are happening here. And the addition of more waveforms starts to make a dynamic field. So you're moving your senses into a deeper state of feeling abreast of multiple wavefronts, and all these multiple wavefronts coming together has the sensation of being more of a fluid dynamic. Now this is important. I'm going to give you now a graphic here to show the metaphoric relationship. Alpha brainwave, which is at 8 to 12 hertz, theta brainwave, 4 to 7 hertz, delta brainwave, which is at 1 to 4 hertz, and then gamma brainwave, which is at 30 to 70 hertz. As you can see, gamma has a lot more frequency range to it, a lot more cycles per second in it. But these longer waveforms here help you move deeper and deeper. And this, adding them together is where you get the qualitative state differences as you're in your meditation. So in our last January 30th evening at Storm Wisdom lecture, which I highly recommend that you watch that, because there's some very deep and important points in there. I'm getting messages or communications from other people. They're still processing some of the depths of that, and in a good way. I know we talked about Black Lilith in there, but the important element is going beyond the physics of the reality into the metaphysics of the reality. And you only do that by cohering more frequencies and embracing them, merging with those other frequencies, help you have a greater expanse, a greater clarity, a greater sense of seeing how big and vast you really are, outside of the 3D concept and the physics of who you are. So, in the work that we do, we're bringing together physics and metaphysics. We're bringing consciousness, we're bringing quantum into our consciousness and our meditative capacities. And so identifying with greater expanses of ourselves becomes a very important element in all of this. So anyway, getting back to the last lecture on January 30th of 2020, I was discussing, at some point, I was discussing in there about how from Purusha, from the one consciousness, the integrated state of consciousness, moving into the void and separated reality, so moving into manifested physical reality, it first had to orchestrate the constructs from voidness, etheric, plasma, astral, gaseous, liquid, and then down to the solid. So each of these layers and levels were orchestrated to embrace the other, to hold it and nurture it, so that the operative of a more separated state could exist, giving us all the different layers and levels necessary for us to experience separation consciousness. So we could totally forget and totally explore reality as if we were alien from it. And so now our whole process has been with moving into deeper and deeper states of consciousness. And as we cohere, as we embrace more symmetrical waveforms, it tends to then help us move out of the boundaries of each of these different layers and levels and start to take our remembrance, our ownership of operating on even those levels, all of those levels. So there's no separation from the unicity of the one, and I think I used graphics such as, this. In this graphic, this is what I use to define the unicity, the one consciousness, the Purusha. And as it formed the void, then inside of the void, it created all the different layers and levels from the 4 states of matter, which is solid, liquid, gaseous, plasma. But as we know, there's more than just the physics of the reality. There's the metaphysics of the reality. So we add the astral, the etheric, the voidness, and consciousness itself. And so each of the layers and levels are made from the one, and each and every one of those layers and levels are actually us. And as we cohere, as we operate, as we call in and embrace alpha, it then sends out the invitation to the next layer and level of frequency to nest with it, because it sends a signal, hey, I'm ready. And so then it comes and nests. It gives you a much more expansive embrace, connectivity, and remembrance of operating on these different layers and levels. So the addition of multiple spectrums of waveforms, and this is the proposed idea here, is to look with your senses, as you're moving into these meditative states, move into that place where you start sensing all the different sorts of wavefronts coming into. You can feel the dynamic feel. You start moving into just, instead of just a vision, you start getting more of a visceral experience, and you start merging with the visceral experience, and so you start moving into more of a fluid dynamic. Now, that's what quantum is. Quantum is the addition of all spectrums, all frequencies. And so there's ranges inside of the quantum that require, these first sets of waveforms coming together so that you can move deeper and deeper into that quantum fluid state. And so if we look at the frequency band, let's say, look at the color frequencies. You start attenuating, start resonating, start feeling, maybe the red frequency. And red helps you move into yellow, so on and so forth, up the rainbow spectrum till you're feeling all the rainbow spectrums together. And there's a different qualitative sensation in your body. And that sensation, from the visible spectrum, the rainbow spectrum, the 7 rays move into white, and white becomes fluid and dynamic. And as you add the addition to it of deeper senses of vulnerability, something starts to happen. You start inviting more and more frequencies to add with those 7 rays. 7 adds 5, and that turns into golden ray. Again, as you keep moving into vulnerability, it starts adding more inclusivity, so the invitation is spread out broader. You're able to sense all these different wavefronts coming in, and you're sorting all of these wavefronts into greater inclusivity. So there's the steerage that starts to occur by your awareness, your consciousness moving to the visceral state of vulnerability. And this is the point of where the messages that they're trying to lead me towards. Golden light leads towards an even higher frequency that's beyond the polarized light frame, and that's diamond clear. Diamond, as you know, is inclusive of both the infrared and the ultraviolet, whereas crystal clear, it has a different framework, that's only the 7 spectrums. So in diamond clear you have much more of the frequencies, and there's a connotation too. In diamond clarity there is no polarization, so you can see deeper, you can see through all polarized light, and that includes darkness. So again, you're steering the invitation through greater vulnerability. Now, I was in the quantum in my meditation, and they pulled out of me from my memory of when I was 14 years old. When I was 14 years old, my mother decided to take all of us kids to go see her side of the family, and she's from the island country of Trinidad and Tobago, and so it's down in the Caribbean. And so we went down there, and my uncle, Uncle Robert, I remember he was much older than I was. I was 14 at the time. He was a manager for Barclays Bank, and he decided to invite all of us kids to go, on a journey with him to different parts of the island, which was very nice. And he wound up taking me. Nobody else wanted to go. I was the only one that wanted to go. So he wound up taking me to the northeastern corner of Trinidad. Now, the northeastern corner is where the Atlantic Ocean meets the Caribbean Ocean. And the Caribbean Ocean is relatively peaceful and calm in comparison to the Atlantic Ocean, which is very dynamic. So it's kind of volatile. And so we are standing on the very edge of the landmass, right on the northeast corner of Trinidad, and you can see this amazing as far as the eye can see, this dynamic boundary line created from the peaceful Caribbean meeting the dynamic and volatile Atlantic Ocean. And where those two waterfronts, bodies of water meet, there's this dynamic boundary, and it's in constant roiling motion. And so when I was in meditation, they were showing me this moment in time back when I was 14, and they were showing me that body of water. Now, earlier I spoke of, and I think I even brought it up in January 30th's Storm Wisdom Quantum Navigation session. From that January 30th Storm Wisdom event, I went over how inside of the void, consciousness had to organize itself on the many different layers and levels, all the way down to separation. And so this is very much like the four states of physics, the four states of matter, solid, liquid, gaseous, plasma. And so as we also add astral and etheric in there and voidness, then you have 7 levels in state. This is, I'm using this as an example. So Spirit is organizing the nothingness from the, let's say, the most refined states, frequencies, all the way down to the most solid state, which you and I exist. And so when they showed me that experience of the two different bodies of water coming together, the Caribbean and the Atlantic, they made a note that as you're working in your meditation to merge with the inclusivity of all these different frequencies coming together, moving into that dynamic body that's fluid-like in nature, and then move deeper into deeper levels of the quantum. What's happening now as we're moving through this 13,000 year separation cycle and moving back into the inclusivity of the integration cycle, they informed me that each of these layers and boundaries that you see here are kind of like an ocean, in that field, that dynamic of the quantum that's expressing itself, holding these different levels and stations, they're a dynamic field on its own, resonating at its own frequency, and so they kind of like are bodies of water. Now, all of these different bodies of water, they're all starting to merge together because we're moving up this frequency band, and the resonant intention is come back home, come back into more fluidity. And so as the boundary of the physical, the boundary of the beta consciousness, by you moving from beta into alpha, you kind of set the tone, and you kind of help move more of that beta frequency into accepting more of the alpha brainwave state, brainwave frequencies. And so, you know, it's a dynamic field, and so there's a roiling motion about this tension and hypertension of what was once formed and fixed, moving now into more of a fluid state. And so, as you can imagine, all of our, you know, I talked earlier about Schrodinger's entanglement of the observer changes the reality. So, you know, as these dynamic bodies of fluid frequencies are changing and starting to envelop one within the other, so to speak, there's all this change, dynamic change that's going on. And if you've experienced working inside of the quantum, you know that the quantum is kind of reflective of whatever entanglements that haven't been sorted out. And so they magnify as you get closer to deeper states of the quantum. And so the pressure then is ultra magnified about you feeling the different sensations in the psychological, emotional shadow, under-processed belief systems and stories that we have. So as you can imagine then, the roiling motion of two bodies coming together puts you in a dynamic state where at one moment you're a hero, the next moment you're the villain, and this is not just your impression or interpretation of what is being projected onto you, so to speak, or you're projecting onto the reality, or the mass consciousness is having these dynamic roiling modes trying to work out and trying to sort and sense, trying to come back to peace. So when we have solid moving to liquid, moving to gaseous, astral, plasma, etheric, voidness, you can imagine all these different frequencies and state, they all got to come back into the harmony of the great unicity of the deeper, diamond clear, pure quantum fluid. And so they told me this quote, and they said that vulnerability steers the singularity. The singularity is inside each and every one of our hearts. So vulnerability steers the singularity towards greater receptivity and inclusivity. So we're kind of the gardeners then of the garden of the quantum and all the frequencies that surround us, moving it back into home, back into the diamond clear quantum state. So it really makes an important distinction. What you propagate, populates, and proliferates in the emotions and in the psychology. However, if you understand the quantum, perfect peace, perfect stillness, and that's the job of the quantum, is to move back in. The quantum doesn't really care too much about what story or emotion we hold against ourselves, against the reality, against the quantum itself. It will sort it out because it is the most clear, pure, inclusive, non-judgmental state. And so the impact then is to know that your access to that diamond clear state stewards all these other frequencies. Remember, we started off with beta brainwave. It starts with there, moving into alpha brainwave and understanding that inclusivity begins there and starts inviting all the other waves together. And if you're with this kind of understanding, it's about moving into perfect peace, perfect clarity, perfect stillness. And so they also told me that, you know, the quantum is kind of like, the metaphor of working in the quantum is kind of like being in a little, they call them dinghies, but they're a little wooden boat. Some of them have a little lever handle for the rudder. Some of them have a little bit of a sail on them. But you go off into the quantum, learning how to abide once again in a fluid reality, a fluid dynamic. And eventually the quantum has the job of taking the boat away from you and teaching you, you don't need the boat. You are the quantum, but we've been contextualized to be inside of this physicality, and we have physical concerns. And so, you know, I mentioned about the January 30th, 2020 Storm Wisdom, where we went over Black Lilith. The importance of the Black Lilith is understanding you're not the physics, you're the quantum physics. And so you're no longer subject under the physics when you realize your home is the metaphysics. beyond that. And so the job of the quantum then is to start to disassemble all the infrastructure. You know, we have a lot of phantom attachments to managing reality according to the physics of the structure and the character. And so this is about, you know, little by little, venturing deeper and deeper into the quantum and learning what your home is, learning who and what you are from a quantum perspective. And so they made another quote. They said, in the quantum, imagine that you're in the boat and you have your hand on the wooden rudder. To steer in the quantum, one needs the vulnerability to steer the singularity towards receptivity and inclusivity. Now that's your rudder. Moving into that vulnerability takes all the frequencies, invites you to probe deeper, go beyond the fear, the pain, shame, blame, fear, guilt, grief, and so on, and the 7 roots of the unconsciousness, where you hold and become the fullness of the whole quantum. And so that's the essence of their message. And when you're in that state then, and all the work that you've done up to this point, seeing that all the fractals propagate their interconnection and reconnection of their own internal sacred geometries, touching every nation, tribe, indigenous and extraterrestrial, and all. So bringing yourself into the quantum, turning around, filling with it, and then realizing that you become the moving, mobile consciousness grid, allowing you then to be the open doorway to allow the bridging from the quantum into the 3D and the separation reality. You become more of the peace. So the propagation inside of a quantum environment, what you populate, what you propagate, populates and proliferates. So consider moving into nothingness, no story, abiding in that pure presence of diamond clear, unconditional love. So I was just talking about the Christ consciousness grid around the planet, and it takes a little bit of extrapolation to take the leap from seeing the grids inside of each of the chakras, forming them together all as one, or one nested set of so many different geometries. Then as you go to different power spots along the planet, you find out that those frequencies have so much commonality, so much resonance with them, and so it's easy to draw the assessment that the nodal points on the planet are connected to a grid system that actually holds different levels of consciousness frequency. So back in the 50s, I believe it was the Russians who used certain sacred geometry models like the Platonic solids, aligned them all together and then fit them over the planet, starting with aligning to the longitude of Greenwich mean, and which is London. And so from there, you look over the grids on the planet, and you can see the major nexus, the major connecting points, and where those major nexuses are, they call them nodal points. Those nodal points hold a very high frequencies, and I've been to a number of these major Christ consciousness nodal points, and the the beauty about being in those spots is that it has so much resonant frequency. It moves you to integrate, cohere, merge with all these different frequencies. So you move quickly, cohering many different brainwave states, and that has the sensation of moving you into deeper and deeper states of fluidity. And inside of fluidity, it's so easy to merge. And so as we're working with the consciousness grids and moving into quantum states, and as the message that they were trying to bring out is that as you move into the greater depths of vulnerability, causing the inclusivity to expand your receptivity in greater and greater expanses, you start moving into greater fields or bodies of fluid dynamics, and those move into deeper states. And as I said, they move up the visible spectrum and move into fluid, white light, quantum fluid, liquid light states, where they move from white to gold. And if you keep moving into ultra vulnerability, the inclusivity has you magnify those frequencies and magnify the inclusion of more frequencies, and you move into diamond clear quantum fluid. And so it's in that diamond clear quantum fluid state that enables the individual to feel so in communion, in reverence, on so many different thresholds of separation realities that there's only one, you get the impression there's only one fluid reality, and that's in greater sense of reverence, you find divinity, and in that divinity, you see all is one. You feel, see, and experience all is one, all is inclusive, and there is no story. All the stories are from separated levels and layers of the self and selves, all working through separation consciousness. So always then the greater diamond clear depths of the quantum fluid will steer and invite through the inclusivity, through the vulnerability, into greater merging, greater coherence with all creation. And so they're making the connection. They wanted to communicate, to make the connection that, yes, as you've seen around the planet, there is a grid system. Well, you don't realize that each of you, by virtue of the connection through the sacred geometry, through the constant cymatic-like effect of frequency creating grids and templates and structure and so on, as you move into quantum fluidity, all that sense of oneness is so profound and so deep that you as you abide in it, you fill in it, and the only thing next to do, remember, at that point you really feel some of the great sages would say, there's nothing to do, nowhere to go, no one to become. It's abiding in such a great expanse and experience of such fluid inclusivity that the only thing you have is conscious care and compassion for all life, and you turn that around, and as you become aware that you're the living grid system, all your fractals are part of the one, and you're tied to every fractal, and you are every fractal, so every fractal makes a grid, a sacred geometry grid. So, and by extension, as you're feeling the quantum fluid of this diamond clear state, you're pouring it out through all these different layers and levels of consciousness. It acts to formulate a coherent, living, mobile grid system, and each nodal point then, where so many wavefronts of the quantum can
can bridge the layers and levels of separation into the 3D from that consciousness state, it then creates the open doors for quantum envelopment to take place through everyone and everything in this conscious quantum environment here in this reality. So once again, the breathing takes you deep into the different variant stages of greater inclusivity, and it's the consciousness then that helps one to cause quantum envelopment to propagate throughout every aspect of every interconnection. Sacred geometry rise, frequency, creating the cymatic templates for the sacred geometry. There's so many infinite interconnections that there's just the diamond clear quantum fluid without any story. Just perfect acceptance. And that's their message.
All right, so we're about to do the meditation, so make yourself comfortable and take a moment or two to make any final adjustments, move the body into the most optimal position for you. And so closing your eyes, bringing your awareness and attention to the here and now, giving yourself permission to let go of all the cares and concerns of the 3D. Giving yourself this moment to journey deep inside. And bringing your awareness and attention to the rhythmic, deep breathing as we connect in consciously to our great Mother, the heart of the Mother Earth. Observing our inner state of vulnerability, sensitivity. And with this sense of vulnerability, we set inclusivity and the invitation of all the levels of divine consciousness to aid and assist. The integrative process of opening deeper states of surrender, vulnerability. Breath, integrating consciousness, prana, dissolving all sense of separation and boundary.
each breath, opening sensitivity and vulnerability. All those fine filaments of the heart's senses, filaments, fiber. As you embrace the mother's love, open the heart to include the sun, the solar system, galaxy, the universe. Allow the inhale and exhale to draw you closer in intimacy, vulnerability, connectivity, reverence. Inclusivity attracts more and more waveforms, becoming so coherent, so fluid. Merge with that fluidity. And magnify it by opening your vulnerable intention. Let the fluidity, the body, of that fluid state deepen, broaden. Pay attention to all the frequencies amalgamating in that inclusivity and fluidity. And keep inviting yourself into deeper states, magnifying the intensity by going into deeper vulnerability as the whole of what your heart embraces. As you merge, surrender more. Notice how much more you embrace, how much more sensitive, fulfilled, detached, complete. Each stage of the process of amalgamating with deeper fluidness, deeper vulnerability attracts. The wetness of the vulnerable states of the heart cohere the unicity. Detachment, vulnerability leads to fulfillment. Surrender and accept more fulfillment. What you release and surrender is replaced by quantum expansion, quantum envelopment. Allow it in to every aspect of your beingness, consciousness. Observe. Where are you? Dissolve the boundaries, attachment. And abide in the continuum, inside the continuum.
Fluidity invites you to open access to every plane, window, doorway. In your consciousness, heart, beingness. As those open, the fluid flows and fulfills, replacing the boundary, door, window, separation. As you fill and abide in the fluidity, stabilized, turn around metaphorically. Allow all the ocean that you are to consciously flow through the open door into the reality your body abides in. Consciousness of the quantum flowing through you into the reality. No desire, no intention other than the propagation of the completeness and wholeness that you're experiencing. Moving through the conscious grid system, that interconnects all things. No want, no desire, just fulfillment.
quantum enveloping all stratas, the solid, liquid, gaseous, astral, etheric, plasma, voidness, conscious quantum. Let the quantum do its thing in the most conscious and holistic. As you stand on all thresholds, observer, source, and character, the unity of Trinity. In all states. From the solid to the conscious, across the void, in every grid, in every fractal. In every being, one source.